really love the action and the straight ahead long casts I get out of these lipless crankbaits. I really feel like I got a handle on designing and making them. If you want to see how I did it, stick around. We'll go back to the shop and I'll show you exactly how I built it. I've taken all these lipless crankbait from my tackle box because I wanted to be able to show you just how different they can be and still be like good baits. And that's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about how to design them and how to make them so you can be relatively sure they're going to work. With lipless crankbaits, somehow I miss the mark more often than I want to. That's not to say that I haven't had some success with them. This one is a lure I call the Cleat, and I made it to fill a specific niche in my arsenal. I needed a crankbait that floated and that cast a long way and accurately. And most of the ones you can buy at a tackle store, usually they sink and are very flat and leaf shaped, and so when you cast them they tend to veer off and not really go very far. So the Cleat gave me a real false sense of security making these things, but thereafter I ran into a lot of trouble making lipless crankbaits and making them so they really worked nicely. All the factory lures I looked at, they were all so different, and it just seemed that you could make them almost any shape. I mean, from this classic sort of leaf shape to an oddball looking thing that looks like it's kind of looking like that but has a giant bulbous belly on it. It gives you a deep rattle, to these very more natural shaped lures that look more like a natural bait. Some of them have broad flat spots and others really narrow, almost non-existent flat spots, like this one. So the fact that you could have a lure that looked like this and a lure that had a shape like that, and they both could swim like lipless crankbaits, that gave me a lot of false confidence that I could make a lure almost any shape, put the tie-on eye to the top of the head, and it would swim right. But in my experience, it's not the case. There is a little bit of a science to making these. So let's get to it. So instead of having actual dimensions, what I have here is proportions. So I'm using L as the length of the lure, and everything else is proportioned to that length. This way you can make a lure any way you want to make it and get the location of the weight right and the general proportions right. The cranking surface is 1/3 the length back from the nose. And the widest part of the lure is 1/2 the length, so halfway through the lure. The angle that the flat spot makes with the center line of the lure should be less than 40 degrees. And this is the general shape I think works best. It's sort of a semi-teardrop with the widest point being right near the center or just below it. The most critical part is the location of the weight. And what I found gives me the greatest guarantee for a lure that has a lot of action and has predictable action is having the weight forward of the center point and either at the center line or just above the center line. The closer to the point of connection seems like the more action I get out of the lure. What about those little fins you see on most of the really popular brands? Well, mostly they're for aesthetics. But if you put one on the top of the lure, like I did on this one, you actually increase the amplitude of the action. So it'll actually give you a sort of a broader wave as it's going through the water instead of just being a very small wiggle. The problem with the little fin on top is that if it isn't perfectly aligned with the center line and perfectly vertical, you stand the chance of throwing your lure off so far that you can't tune it with bending your tie-eye. You can add a fin to the underside, and if you keep it relatively small, it won't affect your lure action at all. Maybe a little bigger than that would be good. So instead of starting over with a different shape, I made a crankbait a few videos ago. It's a lip crankbait, and I want to reproduce that shape, but not necessarily so formally like I did on that video. But if you want to see how I did this exact shape and you want to be able to reproduce it exactly, check out the video, and I'll put a little tag in the right corner of this video. I'm going to sketch the shape directly onto the piece of wood. So I'm going to go out into the shop and cut a 3/8 piece of camphor. Before I sketch in the shape of the lure, I need a center line, so I'm just going to throw one down somewhere in the middle of this board. Now I'm going to mark off how long I want it, about 2 3/4 inches. I like to draw that flat line first, and then I'll taper in and sort of sketch in the curves. And this is just to my taste. Of course, I'm trying to guide myself by that drawing on that brown piece of paper. Then I'll throw down the location of the eye. And here I'm measuring back 1/3 the length, so I know where to put that screw eye. And I'm going to sketch in a little tiny fin at the bottom. All right, so I've got the rough cut of the lure, and right now I'm not worried too much about getting it super refined because I still got some work to do. I'm going to put the weight in now, and I know that's a little strange, but I'll explain it. So what I'm going to do is weigh this rough plug, and because I'm making a lure that I'm expecting to sink, it's easy enough to do a rough estimate of how much weight I can put in it, because I know it's only going to get less buoyant as I carve material off this. So I'm going to weigh it, and it weighs 8.62 grams. And since I know that this camphor has a specific gravity of 0.37, I can then work out how much this has to weigh just to be neutral. And if I put enough weight in there for this block of wood to be neutral, then I know after I whittle away all the material that I need to get the shape right, then I know it'll be less buoyant. That means it'll sink. So I'll divide 8.62 by 0.371, and I get 23.23 grams. That's how much this has to weigh to be perfectly neutral in the water. So to figure out how much lead to add, I'm going to subtract the original weight of the body itself. Then I'm going to subtract 2.5 grams for the hooks and the hardware, and end up with 12 grams that I have to add to it. 11.86, that's close enough. Now, because I want to place the weights way up high in the body, I'm going to drill a hole, and I have the drill bit taped off so I know how deep to go. I'll set it in this vise, and I'll align the center line with the top of the vise. This way I can get a nice vertical drill. I'm going to put this one on a slight angle so I can get it up a little farther up. All right, they're in there. And now I'm mixing some 2-part casting resin. I'm going to pour it in there. This way I'm working with real easy stuff to shape, sand, carve. All right, this stuff will tend to sort of expand as it sets up, and we'll be ready to carve in just a few minutes. Okay, so while this sets up, I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple of photographs of the lure I just carved. And this one is made out of the same wood. It was weighted exactly the same way, and the general shape is the same. But you can see I put a little fin on the back top. And here it is, painted white and sealed, and it's ready to be painted. So these two lures are going to be very similar. The difference is I'm going to put a fin on the bottom on that one, on the very bottom of the curve, and we'll see, hopefully, if I can get some underwater shots, we'll see if there's a difference in the way they wobble. let it set up and I ground it back a little bit so it's nice and smooth. Now I can put on my guidelines. And the key to the guidelines is that on the bottom, they're going to be a little further or closer to the edge because I want the bottom to be kind of chubby. It's going to be the fatter part of the two. And on the top, they'll be a little farther away. And I'll set that up with just a little offset, either using something thin like this or a popsicle stick. And then on top, I'll have to set the wide point, which is right at the middle, right here, and then taper in to my guide points on either end. And it's really mostly important at the tail. And you see, it gives me a thickness that I'm pretty happy with on top. On the bottom, I'll be all right just with the pencil. These are just guidelines. They aren't really going to give me the exact width. It'll just give me where to work to, and then I'll round off as I get there. You can see I'm working my way down those contour lines, and I'm working my way down the side a little bit. Keeping in mind that the wide point is going to be right here. I'm trying not to take too much off right in the center, and I'll work my way down the lure just the same way, and then I'll work my way up these edges the same way best I can. I'll use the Dremel a little bit to get into the tighter radiuses. From here, there's a lot of hand sanding and probably a little more with the Dremel to get the shape just right. And these shapes have so many compound curves in them that it's almost impossible to sort of visualize how they're going to kind of blend together. You just kind of have to work it in and just use your eyes and your sense of aesthetic to make it look good. And the key is symmetry and having the right weight in the right place. Alright, so this is about as good as I need to get it right now. You can see there's some real symmetry there. I've got the shape pretty much how I wanted it, and I've got it pretty symmetric. I'll go ahead and put a full coat of UV resin clear, and I'll use that as my sealer. After one coat of clear UV resin and an hour in the chamber, we're ready for the next step. Here, I'm setting the eye. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. Let's cut the little slot underneath. I cut the slot just with the Dremel disc. And now I need to get my specialty fin making material, which is a popsicle stick. And the good thing about a popsicle stick is that you can shape it easily. It'll fit right in that slot. Let's start working on it. So the first thing I do is just kind of get an idea of what kind of shape this popsicle is going to have to take. And so it's going to have to be rounded at the very bottom. So I've cut a piece small enough to fit in the groove, but big enough that I can sketch the shape of the fin that I actually want it directly onto the piece of wood. I'll draw it a little bigger than I really want. The actual size and shape will be a little bit dependent on my skills carving and sanding. If you take a look, I've got the shape of that fin pretty much how I want it. It'll get smoothed off and sanded just a little more. Alright, I've taken it out of the turner, and you can see that I put the permanent hook eyes and the tie-on eye in, and I also gave it another kind of gloss coat. Now it's time to paint it. And you know, since I've got a gloss coat on both of them, I'm going to go ahead and use the last bit of spastics that I have and turn them as shiny silver as I can, and we'll go from there with the paint job. Well, they both look pretty shiny, though we all know that it's not likely to stay that shiny. All right, let's start with this guy. And I think I'm gonna do this one in a sort of saltwater color. So gold, blues, maybe kind of a faux pinfish kind of thing. Let's see what we come up with. I start off with transparent yellow, turning it gold. Now, using a little template, I'll put in a lateral line with some opaque yellow. Using the same template, I'll put in a blue lateral line just under that yellow one. Now I dust it with some blue to get the scale effect on both sides. Now some light vertical stripes with transparent black. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, this one I'm going to do in bluegill colors. Let's start off with some transparent blue. Now some transparent violet. Now using this little template, some yellow paint and then some black paint, I'm going to create little gill plates. Now I'll mist it over with some transparent bright green. I'll add some scales with a darker transparent green. And now the vertical stripes with some transparent bluish gray. Alright, time to let these two guys dry. Then I'll put the mid coat on, put the eyes on, and we'll put a clear coat on it. Alright, it's been about an hour. Let's see how they came out. Whenever I put those big eyes on these lures, they tend to want to let bubbles out from behind it. I always forget to seat them in a little bit of crazy glue. It usually protects it from doing that. Pretty happy with that. Let's look at the other one. Alright, that looks really good. Very cool colors. Yep. Oh man, that's where those went. Well, I put these hooks on. Just want to remind you guys to subscribe if you haven't, and let me know what kinds of lure builds you'd like to see in these coming months, because I'm really going to push hard this year to try to grow the channel just a little faster and hopefully build a broader viewing audience. So anything you guys can do to help me out, I'd really appreciate it. Share these things with your friends and put it out there on social media if you're into that. So I'm going to get these hooks on and we'll get out on the lake, and hopefully the next thing you'll see is some water shots of these guys. First, let's take a look at the one we painted like a pinfish. This is the one with the fin on top. And you can see it has a pretty broad wobble, especially in this shot. You can really see it shaking back and forth. And now the bluegill version. Here you can see how much tighter that wiggle is. This is the one with the fin underneath. Well, I have to say, I really like the action on both of them. I hope you all enjoyed this and got something out of this video. look forward to the next build. I'll see you guys on the next video.